I am Dori Reno presenting The Lost History of Christianity and How It Died by Philip Jenkins. Jenkins has many credentials. He is a well-respected authority on the subject of global church history and has written several books on the subject. I chose this book because it intrigued me and I wanted to learn about a part of history that I did not know. He has compiled a thorough and significant research here that covers a part of history that is overlooked. Most theological histories trace Christianity through the West. Even our text begins to focus on the Western Church exclusively from about chapter 8 on. The traditional history of Christianity follows its spread from Israel to Rome, onto Europe, and then to America. And the perception is that once the East and West separated, that the East faded out and died. Well, Jenkins says that's quite to the contrary. Jenkins shares a picture of a threefold spread, with Jerusalem in the middle, the spread to Europe, down to Africa, and then out to Asia. Many times these two are ignored, he says. He shares proof after proof that there was a strong Christian presence in the East, maturing faster than the West in their intellectual studies. The church remained on 3 continents until the 14th century. We learned in our text that the issue of the humanity and divinity of Christ was what started the initial division of the church. The bitter dispute divided the believers, and the East and West began to develop separate identities. Placker addresses this and the spread of the Eastern Church briefly at the end of chapter 6. This is where Jenkins' book begins. The Nestorians spread from Syria through China all the way to the Pacific coast, and the Monophysites spread to Egypt and to Ethiopia. Jenkins feels that the Eastern Church is quite valid. He calls the Western Church an incomplete representation of the Church that only remains because it escaped the persecution the East went through. He says that the Eastern Church came closer to preserving New Testament Christianity than the West. In great detail, he traces the history of the Eastern Church, emphasizing that both Islam and Buddhism formed alongside Christianity in the East. He claims that Christianity and Islam histories shaped each other. They lived side by side in harmony for centuries, and many Islam customs resemble early Christian Jewish ones. Now, much of what we call today the Islamic world was once Christian. In fact, 100 years ago, now Muslim lands were Christian. So, if Christianity was truly a global religion that has died, Jenkins wants to explore why. However, he says it survived for centuries through persecution, so Jenkins also examines reasons for that. Now, most of his observations have to do with social immersion and adaptation rather than any type of Christian reasoning. And he repeatedly stresses the need for Christians to understand this history. Jenkins notes that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all believed in the concept of a God who intervenes in history in many and diverse ways. Therefore, it explores 3 questions. Is the death of Christianity God's punishment for some sin? Or perhaps Islam is the only true religion, as they say they are? Or, since it has the Jewish people that were not replaced by Christianity but still have value in God's eyes in their own right, he asks then if Islam might have a similar value. In fact, Jenkins proposes that Islam may be another form of divine revelation that complements but does not replace Christianity. And upon the first reading, I entertained the thought that this might be true. After all, Islam is a product of Abraham's son Isaac, and the feud between Islam and Christianity does resemble, as Jenkins puts it, a bitter family feud. But the Bible just does not support this. The Jewish people are given away to God through the Old Covenant, but Christ's coming and death is the answer to the salvation for all people. As Jesus says in John 14:6, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. In the Bible, there is just no room for a third way. Now, as an American, I am aware of the apparent waning of the church in our country, and the possibility of Christianity becoming extinct here does seem possible, and Jenkins seems to hint at this. However, then he reminds us that while communism declined in just a few short decades, Christian persecution over many centuries still has not completely eradicated the church. So some criticisms. There's a massive amount of information that is hard to follow. It would have been clearer had Jenkins followed either a region-by-region summary or perhaps a timeline, but instead there's a lot of repetition. He assigns the label of Christianity to all forms, even those that were considered heretical. And Jenkins repeats the subject of influence, but does not explore the effects of reverse influence of Buddhism and Islam back on Christianity. He does not make a distinction between faith and religion. Now, Jenkins does an excellent job as a historian, but not so much as a theologian. He uses absolutely no scripture in this book, and he asks many questions but makes no conclusions. So, in review, the Lost History of Christianity is a thorough history of the Church in the East, and it offers great insights into the relationship between religions. However, it carries chilling implications for the future of the Western Church. I would call it an important read, but not a guide for Christian thought.